read along for part 1 of the Iliad, that is the prologue through chapter 3. Here's the prologue. The birth of Paris. Hecuba, the wife of King Priam of Troy, was about to give birth when she had a dreadful nightmare. She dreamed that instead of a baby, she gave birth to a flaming torch crawling with snakes. When she told her dream to the prophets, they told her that the baby must be killed, for if he lived, he would cause the destruction of Troy. As soon as he was born, Priam and Hecuba obediently gave their baby, who they had named Paris, to two of their trusted servants and ordered them to kill him. The servants did not have the heart to kill Paris, so they left him exposed upon a mountainside, expecting that he would die of starvation or would be mauled by wild animals. Instead, Paris was found and raised by a shepherd couple. He grew to manhood as their son. Many years later, when the shepherd boy's favorite bull was chosen by King Priam's servant to be a prize in a funeral games commemorating Paris's death, the young man went to the games and won all of the contests. Priam's daughter Cassandra, to whom Apollo had given the gift of prophecy, announced that this young man was in fact the son that they thought had died. Then his parents welcomed Paris home. The Judgment of Paris. While Paris was still living with the shepherd family, an event occurred that led to the eventual destruction of Troy. Zeus, lord of Olympus, held a royal wedding celebration to honor the sea goddess Thetis and the great mortal hero Peleus. He invited all the gods except Eris, goddess of discord, for a wedding is no place for arguments. Highly insulted, Eris came anyway. When she was not permitted to enter, she threw a golden apple into the hall and announced that it was a gift for the most beautiful goddess. Every goddess wanted the honor of receiving the apple, but finally all of them gave up except for Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. They asked Zeus to decide which of them was the most beautiful, but he refused to choose among his wife and two daughters. So he ordered Hermes, the wayfinder, to take the golden apple and the three goddesses to Mount Ida, and to have Paris, who was herding sheep there, judge among them. Each goddess thought Paris would have an easier time if she promised him a special gift. Hera said, "If you give the apple to me, Paris, I shall give you extraordinary wealth and shall make you ruler over all mortals." Athena said, "If you give the apple to me, Paris, I shall make you the bravest and wisest of mortal men, victorious in war and skillful in every craft." Finally, Aphrodite said, "If you give the apple to me, Paris, I shall give you Helen, the daughter of the king Tynedrius, and the most beautiful woman in the world, as your wife." It did not matter to Aphrodite that Helen was already married to King Menelaus of Sparta. Paris liked Aphrodite's gift best of all, so he awarded the apple to her, and from that time on, Hera and Athena hated all Trojans. Paris then sailed to Sparta, where he was the guest of Menelaus and Helen for 9 days. When Menelaus left on a trip, Paris convinced Helen to return to Troy with him. She left her 9-year-old daughter at home, took all of her possessions, and sailed away on Paris's ship that night. The marriage of Helen. Helen's marriage to Menelaus had involved an unusual circumstance, which also contributed to the eventual destruction of Troy. Because of Helen's beauty, many of the greatest kings in Greece approached her father, King Tynedrius, for her hand. He was afraid to choose one of them for fear that the others would be furious enough to attack the chosen suitor and destroy their marriage. Odysseus, Ajax, Menelaus, and Patroclus were among the suitors. Odysseus looked at his competitors and decided that Helen would never choose him, for he was not handsome. He approached her father and offered to help the king solve the problems of the suitors if, in return, King Tynedrius would help Odysseus win Penelope, who was the king's niece, for his wife. Odysseus suggested that before announcing his choice, the king should make all of the suitors swear that they would punish anyone who tries to break up the marriage. Once the suitors had taken the oath, King Tynedrius chose Menelaus to be the husband of Helen and Odysseus to be the husband of Penelope. Preparation for war. Odysseus and Achilles. When Menelaus returned to Sparta and heard that Paris had carried Helen away, he went to wide-ruling Agamemnon, his powerful brother, and asked him to raise an army to bring her back. He then sent heralds to many of the Greek kings, including Helen's former suitors, to remind them of the oath that they had sworn. Many kings were delighted to have an occasion for heroism and adventure. Odysseus felt otherwise. An oracle had warned Odysseus that if he went to Troy, he would return home alone 20 years later. So when Agamemnon and Menelaus came for him, he pretended to be insane by harnessing a horse and ox instead of 2 oxen to his plow. Knowing that Odysseus was a man of many schemes, the true brothers tested him by taking his infant son, Telemachus, out of his cradle and putting the baby down in front of the plow. To avoid killing his son, Odysseus had to stop pretending to be insane. He made arrangements for organizing the soldiers who would go with him to Troy, and he left with Agamemnon and Menelaus to find Achilles. Achilles' mother, the sea goddess Thetis, could not accept the fact that Achilles was doomed to die, since his father, Peleus, was mortal. In order to be immortal, one must have both an immortal mother and an immortal father. When Achilles was an infant, she tried to burn away his mortality by secretly placing him in a fire at night. However, Peleus suddenly awakened in the middle of the night and found his wife holding the baby in the flames and commanded her to stop. Thetis was so infuriated that she abandoned her husband and returned to her home in the sea to live, leaving Achilles to be reared by his father. A Roman poet writing more than 1,000 years after the Trojan War adds detail to this story. He says that Thetis then took the infant Achilles down to the river Styx in the underworld. There she held on to him by the heel of one foot and submerged him in the water. The river water protected him from every injury that his part of his body touched, so Achilles could never be wounded except for the back of one heel, the Achilles tendon. Homer, however, did not indicate that he knew of this story. Thetis knew that Achilles would die if he fought in the Trojan War, so she hid him in the palace of a king who was a friend of hers. The king dressed 15-year-old Achilles as a girl, gave him a feminine name, and housed him with his daughters. Agamemnon, Menelaus, and Odysseus heard that Achilles was in the palace, but the king would not admit it. He did agree to let them search the palace, but they could not find Achilles anywhere. Odysseus, a man of many schemes, then pretended to be a peddler. He returned to the palace with a tray of beautiful scarves and jewelry, plus a spear and a shield. When the daughters of the king and their handmaidens came into the forecourt of the palace to examine these beautiful articles, he had the servants sound an alarm and shout that the palace was under attack. Achilles immediately tore off the woman's clothing and grabbed the spear and the shield, looking for the attackers. Instead, he found Odysseus, who told him of Helen's abduction. Achilles then promised the Greek kings that he would bring the soldiers to Troy. 1 second, I have to plug my laptop in. Yike. Alright. Departure for Troy. The Greek kings, with all of their soldiers, gathered at Iliad and prepared to sail across the Aegean Sea to Troy. Time passed and the fleet remained beached, for all the winds would not blow in the right direction. Finally, the prophet Calchas announced that favorable winds would blow only when Agamemnon appeased Artemis, goddess of the hunt, by sacrificing his most beautiful daughter. Agamemnon had killed a deer that was sacred to Artemis, and then bragged that he had killed a deer the archer goddess could not have hit. Therefore, he would have to soothe her rage. Agamemnon sent Odysseus to his wife, Clytemnestra, with the false message that the daughter Iphigenia would come to Iliad in order to become the bride of Achilles. When Iphigenia arrived, her father let Calchas place her upon an altar. As the prophet was about to kill her, Artemis secretly substituted a deer and carried Iphigenia off to become one of her priestesses. The wind shifted, and the Greeks set sail for Troy, but Clytemnestra never forgave her husband. Chapter 1, in which Agamemnon insults the priests of Apollo, causing Apollo to punish the Greeks. In order to correct this situation, Agamemnon must give up his prize of honor. Achilles and Agamemnon argue, and as a result, Agamemnon takes Achilles' prize of honor. Achilles, in turn, retaliates by withdrawing from battle. Sing, goddess, of the time when wide-ruling Agamemnon and godlike Achilles parted in anger. The wrath of Achilles brought numerous troubles upon the long-haired Greeks and sent down to Hades the shades of many brave warriors, while dogs and birds feasted upon their dead flesh. Who set Agamemnon and Achilles against each other? Apollo, god of the silver bow, caused the argument when Agamemnon dishonored Apollo's priest. Agamemnon had been awarded the priest's daughter, Chryseis, as a prize of honor, but soon the priest arrived with a rich ransom. He spoke to Agamemnon, his brother Menelaus, and all the other Greeks. May the Olympian gods permit you to destroy Troy, Priam's great city, and to return safely to your homes if you will accept my ransom and free my daughter. Do this out of reverence for the son of Zeus, far-shooting Apollo. All of the Greeks agreed to honor the priest of Apollo except for Agamemnon, whose heart beat with resentment. The wide-ruling king warned the priest, "Do not let me find you by our hollow ships, old man, or even Apollo will not be able to protect you." I refuse to free your daughter. Instead, Chryseis will grow old in my house in Argos, far from you and her country. There she will weave on the loom and serve me. Go peacefully now, without arousing my anger." Agamemnon's words put fear into the priest's heart. Silently he walked some distance along the shore of the salt sea. Then he prayed to Apollo. "Hear me, god of the silver bow. If I have ever pleased you, let your arrows repay the Greeks for my arrow." So he prayed, and Apollo heard him. Down from the peaks of Mount Olympus the far shooter came like night, anger in his heart, and his bow and arrows upon his shoulder. Each invisible arrow carried a deadly disease. First he shot the mules and dogs, and then he killed so many Greek warriors for 9 days that the funeral pyres were burning continuously everywhere. On the 10th day the goddess Hera felt sorry for the Greeks and put into Achilles' heart the idea of calling the Greek leaders together in council. When everyone had assembled, godlike Achilles took the speaker's staff into his hands and said, "Agamemnon, son of Atreus, we are now being destroyed by plague as well as war. Let us ask some priest or prophet to tell us why Apollo is so angry with us. Then perhaps if we appease him with a sacrifice of lambs or goats, he will end the plague." When Achilles had finished speaking, the prophet Calchas, to whom Apollo had given knowledge of the past and future, rose and took the speaker's staff. "Achilles, dear to Zeus," he began, "I will speak out if you will promise to defend me against the anger of the one who rules over all Greeks." To this Achilles replied, "Be brave, Calchas, and reveal what you know. I swear by Apollo, the dear son of Zeus whose gift you possess, that as long as I live and see, no man will harm you, not even if you fear Agamemnon himself, who states that he is by far the greatest of the Greeks." Then Calchas revealed, "The far shooter is punishing us because Agamemnon has dishonored his priest by not accepting his ransom and returning his daughter. Now Apollo will not remove the plague until we have returned Chryseis freely, without accepting any gifts in return." Agamemnon rose angrily. With rage in his heart and fire in his eyes, he grabbed the speaker's staff and exclaimed, "You prophet of evil! You never reveal any good thing. Why must you blame me for Apollo's anger just because I want to keep Chryseis in my own home? I prefer her to my wife, Clymestra, and Chryseis is certainly Clymestra's equal in beauty, intelligence, and skill with handiwork." "Yet even though I love her," Agamemnon continued, "if it is necessary, I will return Chryseis to her father. I prefer to see the Greeks safe rather than dead. Just give me another prize, so that I am not the only noble Greek without the symbol of rank and honor, for it is not appropriate for a person of my stature to have his prize of honor taken from him." Achilles then took up the staff and answered him, "Great son of Atreus, most greedy of all men, how can the great-hearted Greeks give you a prize of honor? We have already distributed everything of value from the cities we have raided, and it is improper to take back what we are given. However, if you give up Chryseis, we will give you prizes worth 3 or 4 times her value when Zeus lets us sack well-defended Troy." Agamemnon replied, "Brave you are, Achilles, but do not try to deceive me. Do you think you can keep your own prize of honor while making me return mine? No. If the great-hearted Greeks give me another prize that pleases me, I shall accept it. Otherwise, I shall seize a prize of honor from you, or Ajax, or from Odysseus, by force. However, I will deal with this later. Now let us return fair Chryseis, and make suitable sacrifices to Apollo, the archer god." Then Achilles, eyes glaring, exclaimed, "Oh, you shameless, cunning man! How is any Greek willing to obey you? I did not come here because the Trojans had injured me. They never bothered my pigs, nor horses, or fields of grain, for great distance separates the rich soil of Philia from Troy, shadowy mountains and the salt sea. Rather it was for you, shameless one, dog-face, for you and your brother Menelaus that we came to wreak vengeance on the Trojans. Yet now," Achilles continued, "you threaten to take away my prize of honor, which I earned and the Greeks gave to me. Whenever I sack a town, my prize is never as great as yours, even though I am the greatest Greek fighter. Even so, my small prize is my own. So now I will return to my homeland. I refuse to stay here, dishonored, in order to win greater wealth for you." To these words, wise ruling Agamemnon replied, "Run away if you wish. I will not ask you to stay. I have many others who honor me, even Zeus, Lord of Olympus. Of all the kings Zeus favors, I hate you most of all, for you are too fond of arguing and fighting. You are strong only because a god has given you that gift. So take your men and your black ships and go home." "I do not care about you or your anger," Agamemnon continued, "but know this. Because Apollo has taken my Chryseis from me, I will come to your hut and take your prize of honor, fair Briseis, from you. Then you will understand how much more powerful I am than you are, and in the days to come no other king will think that he can argue with me and treat me as his equal." As Agamemnon said these words, Achilles debated within himself whether he should draw his sword and kill this arrogant son of Atreus, or whether he would be better to control his anger. While his hand was on his sword hilt, Hera sent Athena down for him, for Hera loved both Agamemnon and Achilles. Athena stood behind Achilles and pulled his golden hair, making herself visible to him alone. Startled, Achilles turned and recognized the bright-eyed goddess. "Why are you here, daughter of Zeus?" he asked. "Have you come to watch how this insolent king will lose his life?" To these words Athena replied, "Hera has sent me here to ask you to control your anger, for she loves both you and Agamemnon. If you will use words against Agamemnon instead of your sword, in days to come you will receive 3 times as many gifts." "No matter how angry he is," Achilles replied, "a man must obey the 2 of you, for the gods will listen to those who obey him." So the son of Peleus leashed his fury, took up the speaker's staff, and attacked Agamemnon with strong words instead. "You drunkard," Achilles exclaimed. "You with the face of a dog but the heart of a deer. You have never been brave enough to arm yourself for battle with your countrymen, or take part in an ambush with the other Greek kings. You are as afraid of afraid of that as you are of dying. Instead, you prefer to seize for yourself the prize of any Greek who disagrees with you. You must rule over mice, not men. Otherwise, you would not think that you could treat people this way." Achilles then announced, "By this staff I am holding in my hands, I swear before you a mighty oath. When hundreds of Greeks fall to their deaths before manslaying Hector because you could not defend them, all the Greeks will long for Achilles' help. Then you will sorrow in your heart, knowing by refusing to honor the best of the Greeks, you have caused their destruction." Then sweet-speaking Nestor, aged and wise king of Pylos, rose and took up the speaker's staff and spoke. "Shame upon both of you," he cried. "It is sad to see the Greeks divided like this. Surely Priam and his sons are delighted to have much strife between the 2 Greeks who are the greatest in counsel and in fighting. Listen to me, for I am older than both of you, and long ago even better men than you have paid attention to my words." Nestor then advised, "You, Achilles, should not think that you can fight against a king. Although you are the mighty son of a goddess, Agamemnon is greater than you are, for he is king over more people. And you, Agamemnon, powerful as you are, do not take Briseis, for the Greeks gave her to Achilles as his prize of honor. Control your anger, for Achilles is the Greeks' great defense in this war." Then Agamemnon replied, "You are right, old sir, but this man thinks that he is the chief commander whom everybody should obey. The immortal gods made him a spearman, but they did also give him an insulting tongue." Achilles interrupted him. "Yes, for people would call me a coward and a mouse if I gave in to your demands. Order others if you will, but not me, for I will obey you no longer. I will not fight you for Briseis because you gave her to me. However, if you attempt to seize anything else that is mine, my spear will invite your dark blood." With these words, the 2 leaders rose and disbanded the assembly. Agamemnon sent Chryseis homeward, with Odysseus as captain. He then commanded the Greeks to purify themselves in the salt sea and sacrifice bulls and goats to Apollo. Achilles returned to his huts, where he gave up Briseis to Agamemnon's 2 heralds. As they were about to leave, he announced, "Let the 2 of you be my witness, before the immortal gods and mortal men, before that foolish king, when the day comes that the Greeks need me and save them from destruction. For the wide-ruling son of Atreus does not have the sense to look ahead and see the consequences of his actions." Chapter 2, in which Achilles' mother agrees to persuade Zeus to restore Achilles' honor by showing the Greek gods that unless he rejoins the war, the Trojans will defeat them. Zeus sends Agamemnon a false dream that tells the king to attack Troy now, for the attack will be successful. When the Greeks and Trojans meet on the battlefield, Menelaus and Paris fight one another, but neither warrior is clearly victorious. Then godlike Achilles sat down, alone, beside the shore of the loud-sounding sea and cried. Stretching out his hands, he prayed to his mother, the silver-footed Thetis. "Seeing that my life will be so brief," he began, "surely Zeus, the loud thunderer, should permit me to be honored. Yet wide-ruling Agamemnon has dishonored me by seizing Briseis, my prize of honor." Thetis heard Achilles' prayer deep in the salty sea. Quickly she emerged like a mist, comforting her son as she listened to his tale of sorrow. When he had finished, Achilles said, "As I was growing up in my father's house, I often heard you brag of how, of all the immortal gods, you alone saved Zeus of the storm clouds when the other gods united against him and bound him up so intricately. You brought Briareus, one of the 100-handed giants, to rescue him, and in this way you earned his eternal affection and gratitude. So please help me now, Achilles pleaded. Go to Zeus, Lord of Counsel, and ask him to help the Trojans for my sake, letting the Greeks die by their ships. Only through disaster will Agamemnon, the arrogant son of Atreus, discover how blind he was when he refused to honor the best of the Greeks. Tearfully, Thetis replied, knowing how short your life will be, I wish that you could have been spared this grief. Instead, you bear sorrows that are too great for any one man. Do not attempt to leash your anger. Avoid all battle and stay instead in your swift black ships. Meanwhile, I will go up to snow-covered Olympus and plan to convince Zeus to support us. Achilles obeyed his mother's instructions. He no longer attended the council sessions where men win glory, and he remained idly by his ships, far from the battlefield. Yet he sorely missed the war cry and fighting. As she had promised, Thetis approached Zeus, and as he sat alone upon the highest peak of many-merged Olympus. Father Zeus, she prayed, if ever I helped you by word or deed, hear my plea. Bring honor to my son who is fated to die so young, for Agamemnon has dishonored him by taking his prize of honor. Please help the Trojans until the Greeks restore my son's honor and compensate him for their insult. Bow your head in agreement, or else deny my prayer and show me how little you honor me. Zeus, the cloud-gatherer, replied, You are making my life with Hera more difficult by asking this of me. She already complains that I have given the Trojans too much help in the battle. Yet I will do as you wish. While gods and mortals slept, Zeus considered how he could best bring honor to Achilles and kill many of the Greeks beside their black ships. He decided to send wide-ruling Agamemnon a misleading dream. Calling Dream to his side, he commanded, Go, harmful Dream, and tell Agamemnon to rouse the long-haired Greeks to battle now, that they can conquer the well-defended city of the Trojans. Hera has convinced all the gods to side with the Greeks. So Zeus spoke, and Dream went to Agamemnon, appearing in the form of Nestor, king of sandy Pylos, whom all the elder Greeks Agamemnon most honored. Why are you asleep, Agamemnon? Dream asked. A leader in your position, in charge of the entire Greek army, should have too much on his mind to sleep the night away. Now listen carefully, for I bring you a message from Zeus, Lord of Olympus, who cares for you. Quickly rouse all the bronze-coated Greeks to arms, because now is the time to take Priam's great city. Hera has won the support of all the deathless gods, and by the will of Zeus, Troy is doomed. Do not forget those words once you have awakened. So Dream spoke to Agamemnon and departed. Once wide awake, Agamemnon foolishly believed the dream to reflect reality. He put on his tunic, cloak, and sandals, and hung his sword around his shoulders. He took his father's scepter, fashioned by Hephaestus, and in his hand had his heralds call the Greeks to assembly. When Agamemnon explained to the council of elders the nature of his dream, wise Nestor spoke. Friends, kings, leaders of the Greeks, he began, if any other Greek had such a dream, we might think it false and therefore ignore it. However, since Agamemnon, who states that he is by far the greatest of the Greeks, has heard these words, let us prepare to attack. Meanwhile, Zeus sent Iris, his wind-footed messenger, to place where the Trojan forces had assembled. There she appeared in the form of the Trojan principal's watchman. Old sir, Iris said to Priam, I have been part of many battles, but I have never seen such a large and impressive army marching across the plain to attack us. In numbers they are as great as leaves in the woods or the sand along the salt sea. Then Iris returned to Hector of the shining helm. Hector, godlike son of Priam, I place you in command of all the Trojans and our allies. Because of those who have come to our aid speak many different languages, let each chieftain inform and lead his own countrymen out to battle. So Iris spoke, and Hector knew her true voice and obeyed her advice. The horse-taming Trojans marched upon the field as noisily as cranes fly up in the sky towards the ocean when they flee from the heavy rains of winter. The bronze-coated Greeks silently approached them, each man with courage in his heart and eager for battle. Just as the south wind spreads the mist over mountain peaks, a mist that the shepherd dislikes but the robber loves, for it hides the land when a man can see no further than he can throw a stone, so the feet of these hundreds upon hundreds of marching men created a heavy cloud of dust out over the armies as they moved quickly across the plain. As the Greeks approached the Trojans, Paris became the Trojan champion, carrying a bronze-tipped spear in each hand and upon his shoulders a panther skin, his curved bow and his sword, and he challenged the Greeks. "Come forth, any of you who think you are the best of the Greeks," he announced. "I challenge you to fight me face to face to the death." Menelaus was pleased in his heart to see Paris emerge from the Trojan throng. Just as a hungry lion delighted to come upon the carcass of a great horned stag or a wild goat, he eats the tasty flesh even though he senses that young hunters with their pack of dogs are swiftly coming upon him, so Menelaus was delighted to see Paris, for the war-loving kings of Sparta are anxious to make vengeance upon the Trojan prince who had taken fair Helen from her home and had carried her across the sea to Troy. But when Paris saw Menelaus leap from his chariot in order to accept his challenge, Paris suddenly became terrified. As a man turns pale, trembles, and reels backwards when he spies a snake on the mountain path, so did Paris shriek fearfully away from the war-loving Menelaus to hide among his Trojan ranks. When Hector observed this behavior, he criticized his brother with strong words. "Evil Paris, you are so handsome that women cannot resist you. It would have been far better for the Trojans people had you never been born, or had you died unwed. As it is, your behavior is shameful. Your countrymen scorn you, and Greeks must be laughing indeed to see that the Trojan champion, for all his beauty, lacks courage in his heart." Hector then asked, "Are you the same man who crossed the salt sea to a strange land and returned with a beautiful woman, bringing sorrow upon your father, your city, and your countrymen, and shame upon yourself? Do you really intend to evade Menelaus? You should learn what kind of man he is whose wife you took. You will find no help in your lyre or the gifts Aphrodite has bestowed upon you, for Menelaus is a respected warrior who would send you defeated into the dust. The Trojan people must share your cowardice, or they would have stoned you to death long before this, for all evils you have brought to them." To these words Paris replied, "Hector, you are right to criticize me, but do not try to blame me for golden Aphrodite's gifts. Instead, command all the Greeks and Trojans to stand aside while I fight Menelaus hand to hand for fair Helen and her treasure. Then our people and their allies can return home, and the Greeks can return to their lands in peace." All the Greeks and Trojans were overjoyed to hear Hector's announcement, for the war was rightfully a conflict between Paris and Menelaus, and few were enthusiastic about continuing the fighting into a 10th year. The leaders of both forces united in prayer to Zeus and the other immortal gods, swearing to the terms of agreement. Wide-ruling Agamemnon raised his arms and prayed, "Father Zeus, observe our oaths. If Paris kills Menelaus, fair Helen and all of her possessions shall be his, and we will return to Greece empty-handed. But if fair-haired Menelaus kills Paris, then the Trojans must return Helen and her treasure, along with suitable compensation for inciting us to war. Otherwise, I will remain on Trojan soil and continue this fight until I win what is rightfully mine." When Paris and Menelaus had armed themselves, they entered the clearing between the seated Trojan and Greek forces, approaching each other with glaring looks and ready spears. Paris was the first to throw his far-shadowing spear, which bent its bronze point upon the meeting Menelaus's round shield. As Menelaus raised his spear, he prayed, "Zeus, Lord of Olympus, permit me to punish Paris for stealing my wife, so that any guest hereafter will fear to commit offense against his friendly host." His spear penetrated Paris's armor, but it did not draw blood, for when he smashed his sword upon Paris's helmet, that sword fell to the ground, broken into 4 pieces. So war-loving, Menelaus jumped upon Paris, grabbed the thick horsehair crust off his helmet, and pulled him to the ground, and began to drag his body backwards toward the seated Greek. Paris would have strangled to death, bringing Menelaus endless glory, if Aphrodite had not observed Paris's plight and cut his helmet strap, permitting him to break loose from Menelaus's grasp. When Menelaus leaped after Paris with a bronze spear, he could not find him, for Aphrodite had lifted him up, hidden him in a dense mist, and returned him to his bedroom in Priam's great city. Agamemnon shouted, "Hear me, all you Trojans and your allies. Obviously, Menelaus has won the duel, so return Helen and her treasure to her rightful husband, and compensate the Greeks for Paris's offense." So he spoke, and all the Greeks shouted in agreement. However, Hera and Athena were still angry with Paris for choosing Aphrodite's beauty over their own. This meant that Zeus could keep his word to Thetis without offending them, and the immortals agreed that Athena should cause the battle to resume. Athena chose the Trojan Pandareus, and appeared to him in the form of a respected Trojan spearman. "Why don't you shoot at Menelaus with one of your arrows?" she suggested. Then you will win fame and honor in the eyes of the Trojans, especially Paris. He will surely reward you most handsomely for killing Atreus' war-loving son." So bright-eyed Athena persuaded the foolish Pandarus to draw up his bow upon the unsuspecting Menelaus. However, because Athena at heart was a friend to the king of Sparta, she directed Pandarus' arrow through Menelaus' belt, where it wounded but did not kill him. Agamemnon was so outraged at the injury to his brother that no one could accuse him of reluctance or cowardice as the Trojans resumed battle. Leaving his chariot, he went by foot through the ranks of the bronze-coated Greeks, eagerly cheering them on to battle and winning glory. "Father Zeus will not help those who do not keep their word," he cried. "So be of good strength and courage. Vultures will feed on Trojan flesh, and many Trojan wives and children will sail home with us once we have taken Priam's well-defended city." Just as the waves of the salt sea pound upon the shore, one after the other, driven forward by the great west wind, so did the Greeks return to battle, group after group in endless succession, each chieftain commanded with his respectful, silent men, gleaming in their armor. The Trojans, on the other hand, were as noisy as herds of sheep, impatiently waiting to be milked, but they included peoples from many lands who did not share a common language. Bronze clashed upon bronze, and untold numbers of Greeks and Trojans remained on the plain, intermingled with their faces buried in the dust. Chapter 3. Hector returns to Troy, and he urges Paris to join the Trojan War, and then he bids farewell to his wife and his son. Hector of the Shining Helm decided to leave the plain of battle and enter Priam's great city in order to ask the women of Troy to pray against the deathless gods for help. The bronze-coated Greeks were clashing against the horse-taming Trojans with a mighty uproar, and Hector was no longer confident of a Trojan victory. Louder than the waves of the sea as they crash upon the shore when they are driven from the ocean's depths by the harsh blowing of the north wind, louder than the roaring of a fire that rages among the trees of a forested mountainside, louder than the howling wind among the highest branches of the oak trees were the Greeks and Trojans as Hector left them. When his mother spied him, she cried, "My dearest child, why have you left that dreadful battle to return home? Do you wish us to offer prayers to Zeus, Lord of Olympus? Stay while I bring you honey-sweet wine for the prayer, and then relax and have some wine yourself." So Queen Hecuba spoke to her godlike son. Man-slaying Hector replied, "Mother, do not bring me any honey-sweet wine unless you want to weaken me and make me forget my strength and my courage. I am so covered in the dirt and blood of battle that it is wiser for you and the other women to pray to Athena than for me to petition Zeus of the storm clouds. I am here to call Paris to battle if he will listen to me." Hector found his brother at home in his bedroom, aimlessly handling the shield and his bow, while Helen sat among her servants and their handiwork. Again he addressed Paris with contempt. "Strange man, your countrymen are dying in battle upon the wall and within the city, and here you sit? And yet you are the person responsible for the raising of the war cry around Troy. You yourself would be very angry with any coward you caught shirking away from this hateful war. So arise and defend your city before it is burned to the ground." "You are right as usual, Hector. Even Helen has been urging me to join the fighting. So either stay with us while I put on my armor or go your own way. I shall follow, and I will probably overtake you before you leave the city." When Hector did not reply, Helen spoke softly to him. "I wish that on the day I was born, a great storm wind had carried me to some lonely mountainside, or to the shore of the loud-sounding sea, where the waves would have washed me away, for this hateful war never should have occurred. Or, considering that the deathless gods determined these events, I wish that they had married me to a better man than Paris, one who could feel the anger and hatred of his family and his people. Paris will never change, and I fear that he will reap the bitter fruit of the seeds he has sown. But come and sit down, dear Hector, since Paris's foolishness and my shame have laid the heaviest burden on your shoulders." Hector replied, "Do not ask me to stay, Helen, even though you love me. I am most anxious to rejoin the Trojan forces, whom I know miss my help, while I am within the city walls. Try and make Paris move quickly so that he will be able to overtake me. Meanwhile, I shall go home and see my dearest wife and baby, perhaps for the last time." With these words, Hector went searching for his wife and child. They met him near the Scaean gates, the entrance to Priam's great city, for the Andromach had been standing at the great wall of Troy, weeping as she searched for the battlefield for him. Hector smiled wordlessly as he gazed upon his infant son, but Andromache tearfully approached her husband, took his hand in hers, and pleaded with him. "Oh, Hector," she cried, "your courage and your skills in battle will destroy you. You lack any pity for your baby son who will become an orphan, or the woman who will become your widow, for the bronze-coated Greeks will soon kill you. It would be better for me to die than lose you, for swift-footed Achilles had made me an orphan. He killed my kingly father for his armor, and then murdered my 7 brothers as they were tending their sheep. And then Artemis killed my mother. So, dear Hector, you are my father, my mother, and my brother, as well as my husband. Have pity upon me and remain here upon the walls of Troy." Finally, Andromache advised her husband, "Position the Trojans by the wild fig tree, for there the wall is most easily accessible. 3 times already the greatest warriors among the Greeks have tried to enter there." Hector responded, "Dearest wife, I too have thought of this, but our people would look upon me with shame if I were to shrink like a coward from battle. My own heart cannot tolerate such behavior. I was taught to be courageous always, and to lead the Trojans into battle, to win great glory for my father and for myself. My heart and my soul tell me that the day will come when the Greeks will destroy our fair city and its people. Yet I do not grieve for anyone in my family as much as I do for you, when some Greek steals your freedom and leads you across the salt sea against your will." "There," Hector added, "as a slave in some Greek household, you will work at the loom as some mistress directs you, and you will carry water from the spring as a part of your sad burden. And when he notices your tears, some stranger will say, 'Look, there goes the wife of man-slaying Hector, who was the greatest in war of all the Trojans the days when the men fought against the man at Troy. May I be dead, and may the earth cover my body before the Greeks enslave you.'" With these words, Hector stretched out his arms to his little son, but Astyanax, terrified by his father's shining bronze helmet and its wildly waving horsehair crest, tearfully withdrew from his embrace. Then Hector and Andromache laughed together, and Hector removed the helmet from his head and placed it upon the ground. Taking his infant son in his arms, Hector kissed Astyanax and prayed. "Zeus and all you other immortal gods," he began, "permit my son to live and to grow, and to be as courageous and strong as I am, and foremost among the Trojan people, and grant that he will become a great king of Troy. Then one day may someone say of him as he returns from war, 'He is better far than his father,' and his mother will be glad in her heart." Hector then placed Astyanax in his mother's arms, and she held him, smiling through her tears. The sight brought pity to Hector's heart, and he caressed Andromache as he said, "Dearest, please try not to be too unhappy. I shall not die before my fate sends me down to Hades, and I share the same fate as every other mortal. Neither the courageousness nor the cowardly can escape it. So return home," her husband concluded, "and to keep busy with your daily chores. War is the responsibility of the men of Troy, and therefore mostly mine." Hector put on his crested helmet on his head and returned to his men. Andromache walked home, frequently looking back tearfully. When she arrived, all the women of the household cried for Hector, even though he still lived, for in their hearts they knew that he would never return alive from this battle with the Greeks. Paris did not dally long at home. Just as a well-fed horse breaks his rein and goes galloping across the field, anticipating a swim in a fast current of the river, and rejoices in strength and splendor as he carries his head high and feels the mane waving upon his neck, so Paris in his sparkling armor moved through the streets of the city on his swift feet, laughing with the pure joy of being alive. He met his brother Hector as he was leaving the palace, a place where he talked with Andromache. "Hector," Paris apologized, "I am sure that I delayed you and did not come as soon as you wish." To those words Hector replied, "No. No one is an observant who can criticize your skill in battle, Paris, for you are also courageous and strong. But you are also irresponsible, and it makes me sad to hear the Trojans say truly that you are the cause of their troubles. However, let us go on our way. We will deal with this later if Zeus lets us drive the Greeks from their land."